Happy Sunday. Welcome to another edition of Macbeth Family Stories. I thought I'd bring you back into the story by backing up a little more. There were a couple of things that I wanted to tell you about that I'd neglected to mention before I get into the rest of what happened after Esther died. Uh, One of my siblings asked your grandpa to talk about when he was ordained as a deacon. That's kind of an interesting story to include in this. He had been just knocking around town as an ordinary kid, and one day the bishop called him in, Bishop Snow, and sat him down and said, "John, I think it's about time for you to be ordained a deacon." He's going, "Okay, if you think that's what ought to happen." The bishop said, "I do. I think that'd be a good thing for you." And he said, "But we have a procedure here that we go through." So he said, "Well, next Sunday," said, "I'll take you around and we'll go through each of the quorums, priesthood quorums, and they'll get a say into whether you should be ordained a deacon or not." And he said he hung out with a bunch of kids from the neighborhood, and they would often go hang out in the little store down the street that had some penny candy in it, and just, fun little store, a good place for kids to go and hang out, they thought. The store owner wasn't so excited about it, and that just happened to be Bishop Snow's son. And so Brother Snow would see these kids coming into his store and just kind of roll his eyes and, "Oh, here we go again. Weren't they just here yesterday?" And Dad said they weren't really up to anything serious. They were hoping that somebody would drop some penny candy or something on the floor that they could snag. They were mostly just hanging out like boys do, not really causing problems. But he said there may have been a piece of candy or two that disappeared in his time in that store. So he was thinking about this all week, getting ready to go to this meeting in the priesthood quorums. And he said, Bishop took him Sunday, and down the hall they went into the deacon's quorum, and he thought, "Oh, this will be easy. These are all my buddies." And it was. They all voted for him, and off to the teacher's quorum, and that was the same thing, and off to the priest quorum, and that was making him a little nervous because, these guys are 16, 17, but they all voted for him. And then into the elders' quorum, and he said, there's this room full of men. And he said he just wasn't sure what they thought, but the bishop was saying, we want to call John to be a deacon, and I think this is a great thing to do. And lo and behold, much to his relief, they all voted for him. But now they had to go to the high priest quorum, and that's where he walked into the room, and he met eyeball to eyeball with Brother Snow, the store owner, who just was looking at him. And the bishop stood up and said, "I propose that we ordain John to be a deacon, and I want to know if all of you can vote for him and support him." And Dad said he was getting pretty nervous at that point, pretty hot under his collar about, how am I going to go home and explain to my mom that the high priest wouldn't vote for me? I couldn't get ordained a deacon. This is going to be bad. But as he looked up, Brother Snow was still looking at him, eyeball to eyeball. And as the bishop called for a vote, Brother Snow just stared at him and then slowly raised his hand all the way to the top. And Dad said, if he had written me a letter, I couldn't have understood what he was telling me any better than at that very moment. And when he told this story, he said, 40 years has gone by. And he said, I can still see the look on his face sending me that message. Okay, that's a pretty good story. Another interesting connection to the Snows was one day he and his brothers, shortly after Esther had died, were wandering around town. They didn't have a lot to do without her there to direct them. So they were just out cruising. And they walked past the mechanic's shop. And as he walked by, he said, the bishop kind of whistled at him and said, John, come here a minute. I'd like to talk to you for a second. He said, caught him a little off guard. But he walked into his shop and he stopped what he was doing and he looked at John, and Dad's thinking, what's he going to try and tell me? You know, I'm 17. I've gone through this awful thing with my mom. You know, what's he got to say? And he said he clearly was a little uncomfortable in thinking that he was going to have anything great to instruct me about. But he said, he leaned over and put his arm on my shoulder and said, I just wanted to tell you that anything you do, your brothers are going to think is okay. And that was all he said. And Dad said he turned and walked away, but he said that's given him pause a lot to think about. Whatever he does, his little brothers are going to follow suit and do the same thing. And he said there were many times where he was up to no good and he stopped what he was doing because his brothers thought it would be okay. And it wasn't going to be okay. So in the first few days after Esther had passed away, Dad said they discovered a lot of things that they had not had any experience with. He said, first of all, was milking the cow. He said, my mom really liked milking the cow. And he said, we're sure that's why she had such great arms, is because she milked that cow twice a day, every day. But she wasn't there. There was nobody else to do it. So for the first time in his life, he learned how to milk the cow. He said it wasn't pretty, but he got it done. He said the Relief Society president came to them shortly after Esther's funeral and said, well, we're going to help you out as much as we can. And so for the first 2 weeks, they brought dinner into the kids. He said, again, they never saw Harmon Curtis. He had locked himself up in the bedroom and would not come out. They knew he was managing the post office because they could see the mail go into the slots where it had to be, but they never saw him. They'd leave dinner at the door, and he most often would not answer, or he wasn't even home. So he became very distant, very distant. But there were still hungry kids in the house and that had to be fed and taken care of, and after 2 weeks, the Relief Society president came to him and said, John, we've done about all we can do for you. So from here on, you're on your own. We'll keep an eye out and help where we can, but we're turning this over to you. And he said, now, that's pretty tough duty. He's 17. His mom's always been the chief cook and bottle washer, but he knew how to do a few things. And he said he looked at his sister Mabel, who looked so much like her mother. He said that he could hardly stand to be in the room with her. It was so painful. But he looked at her and said, so what do you think you can cook? And she said, I can peel potatoes. So they peeled up and boiled some potatoes. And he said, well, if she can do that, I've seen Mom make gravy a lot. I can do that. A little bit of fat in the pan and some flour, and you stir it up till it's brown, and you add some milk to it, and we'll do this. And he said it was so awful, absolutely awful. But those kids ate it because that was all they had. And he said we somehow struggled through, but he said, oh, what an aching mess it was for those kids. By the end of the summer, they'd had kind of a little family meeting with him and the remaining aunts and uncles, Aunt Ruby and Uncle Cyril, and they had all concluded that probably the very best thing that could happen would be for John to go to Henniker's Business College, which is now LDS Business College. So they managed to get him accepted at Henniker's, courtesy of Uncle Cyril, who had graduated from there. And off he went to Salt Lake to begin his college career. he didn't have enough money to pay tuition, and so they got him a job at the school running the elevator. That was his job and how he paid his tuition. But he didn't have money for any place to live, so he lived with uh, Uncle Cyril at their house. And he and his wife, Aunt Olivia, and Uncle Cyril had a house full of kids, 7 or 8 kids, 8 or 9 kids. He couldn't remember for sure. Their oldest had been recently killed on an accident. He was the paper boy, was out delivering papers, and was hit and killed by a car. And he said that was a heartbreaker as well. But because there were so many children in the family, they didn't have a lot of extra bed space, to say the least. And so he was assigned to sleep with his cousin Kenneth. And Aunt Olivia took him aside and said, "Happy to have you here. This is the best we can do for you for a bed. But you should be warned that Kenneth is a bedwetter, and we've never been able to cure him of it. We don't know what's causing this. We don't know what it's going to take to cure him, but sorry, it's the best we can do." So he said, I thought, well, this is a raw deal. I'm not sure that I'm signed up for this, but he really didn't have any choice. He had no place to go. So he sat down with Kenneth and said, "Listen, this isn't going to fly. I'm not going to sleep in a bed that you're wetting." And Kenneth said, "Well, I can't stop it. We've tried everything. It's just how I am." So very nervously, Dad got into bed with Cousin Kenneth, and he said he finally managed to fall asleep. And he said one of the strangest experiences of his life was being woken up with that warm, wet, odorous sensations, feelings, smelling. He said he was very disgusted. So he turned over, put his back against the wall, and put his foot right in the belly of Kenneth and pushed him out of bed onto the concrete floor. And of course, he cried and cried, "It's not my fault." And Dad said, "Well, that's fine, but I'm not sharing the bed with you. You're going to sleep on the floor." And he said it must have been cold. He must have shivered all night long. And sure enough, in the morning, he went upstairs and cried to his mother about how poorly he'd been treated, and this isn't fair. And she just patted him on the head and said, "That's too bad, but that's the way it's going to be." And Dad said that was the very last time that Kenneth wet the bed.